So, for Maxi, for your game that you ran, I understand that the audience need to know a little bit more about your Verdant's Cascade setting.
Yeah, definitely.
So maybe because I think Beth knows a bit about that. Maybe you two could lay that out for everyone.
Okay,
Sure.
so just to start with, I'll say that in the previous QCon games, where I've been running games in, I've been running it in primarily a world known as Verdant. Now, that's not the only world in my setting. There are 3 worlds that make up the entirety of the setting. Verdant is just the primary world. It's the one in which all the standard races from the player's handbook are completely legal, except like halflings, I think I leave out. And it's really a very, very traditional sort of RPG fantasy setting. Like, nothing very different. Cyrith, which is where I've done this QCon's games in, is completely different. Beth, how would you describe Cyrith?
It's certainly a fantasy setting. I don't really. It's got a lot of it's got a lot of very original kind of homebrew races. Like, I guess the only ones you'd really recognize would be the Aasimar and like dark elves and stuff, because then you've got like the flower elves who are kind of like wood elves, but they've got like horns and flower shit going on. And you've got, like, kind of dwarfs, but they're, like, robot people.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got, like, there are a lot of vampires in this setting. Like, being a vampire is just, like, a default human thing. Like, that's, like, default. It's, like, all humans got turned. Like, there was, like, this event or something that happened.
Yeah.
This is where Maxi's like, wow, Beth has not been paying attention. Beth has no idea.
I mean, you're doing pretty well. Okay.
So like,
I'll jump in here, intervene, and save you from drowning.
Okay. You are a lifeguard.
All 3 worlds of my setting are connected to each other. They're all connected to the primary world of Verdant, which is like responsible in the creation of the other 2 subworlds, and those subworlds are Cyrith and Etheru. And for the Cyrith setting, I would describe it as an ancient world, primal, high magic, non-West European queer theme setting. And what that means is that I didn't want to have to do stuff like taverns and like big cities or anything like that. I wanted, like, people to still be primarily nomadic and very small settlements. Magic in the setting it's everywhere. It's like radiation, because what happened 12,000 years before the setting starts is that within the core of the world of Cyrith, there was an incredible amount of mana, and it was just chaotic, and it kept replicating, and it was like bursting at the seams till eventually, through seismic activity, it broke through into the surface of the world and like atomized, basically. Alex does somewhat different with raw mana, where it's like liquid, but like for me it's more like atomization and radiation. And the setting,
just briefly, the liquid thing is generally understood in places where it happens to be like an unnatural, uncommon form based on like what's the word, compression. Normally, it is actually like a much more similar thing of just having it be atomized like in the air around you.
Well, it's like very highly concentrated all the time, and originally when like I'd say as a comparison to our own real world, it would have been like the Bronze Age sort of thing. That was when all of the original races, which started out as humans, elves, dwarves, orcs, etc., were changed, transformed, and mutated by the effects of exposure to mana into all of these custom-built races that I created and have worked on and edited over an extensive period of time, to the point where I'm pretty happy with the way that they're all laid out. They've each got their own culture, their own customs, and life, for the most part, for the people of Cyrith has gotten a lot better, because after the surges happened, the thematic surges, which was what they call the event where mana through seismic activity burst through into the surface of the world and started changing people, the gods then acted in an event known as the Severance, where they channeled their divinity and planar energy into a singular strike that would go straight through the center of the breaking continent and pierce the core with enough stabilizing divine power that it would just like keep it under wraps for an unknown amount of time, but presumably for a very, very long time. It's like a slow acting, I guess like it's like when you add an alkaline to an acid. Yeah, it's like pretty much like that. It's like Gaviscon for heartburn. That's what the gods did. But the reason that's called the Severance is more than just of them severing the continent into 3 different continents. It's because they severed themselves from the outer planes, and now gods live in the world amongst mortals. They can like still get in. They can still channel energy from the outer planes, which is why they are able to maintain their power, but they can't occupy them anymore. So they've had to deal with that over the 12,000 years. And of the 3 continents, I'm running a campaign setting at the moment with Beth, where it's all set on Athroya, which is like very in the north. It's sort of Baltic and Finnish, and in the Midland of the continent, it's like ancient China, and towards the south, it's East Africa. And you guys are having like a proper Wind Waker of it sort of thing.
Yeah,
You're like
yeah,
traveling around and exploring all the regions, and I love it. That's really, really what I want.
Yeah, no,
and
yeah,
obviously,
like that's one of the aspects I really like is the exploration aspect. Like, I despite the fact that I cannot accurately describe your setting at all, and I seem to have not paid attention to anything you said, even though I have, I do enjoy your game a lot because there's this real exploration aspect, and it feels very cool. And I also enjoy playing a child's detective slightly meanly because it's sort of like a slightly like low tech setting. And I was like, I'm gonna play a like extremely Victorian steampunk based character, and Maxi was like, okay, fine.
Maxi was like the Nicolas Cage meme face. I was just like had my hands in front of my lips, and I was like, oh god. Okay, fine.
Fine, yeah. So it's like, why can't you just be normal and be a normal character in Matt's game? Why do you have to put the suffering on me specifically? And I'm like,
Well, I mean, I get my revenge in lots of ways.
That's
by
true.
Constantly reminding you narratively that you're a child.
That's true.
And, like, having you interact with other children who don't see you as anything more than a child.
Yeah, and I'm like, no, I'm better than you. Anyway, yeah.
So, for QCon, I didn't want to do anything on Athroya, especially while I was doing the main campaign, so I thought to myself, I'm going to do something on Okeen. And Okeen is the continent which is like, it's a bit South American, so it's got inspiration from Mayan, Inca, and Aztec cultures, and it's Polynesian as well, especially Samoan, because it's got all these islands around it, and it's also like Sri Lankan and Cambodia and Thailand sort of thing. So it's like loads of jungle, lots of mountains and stuff. And it's like, I have a lot of fun with Okeen. And I set each game in a different point, in a different place in Okeen. I set the first game in a region known as Darket. And in the second game, I set it in a region known as Manoi. And like with Alex and like with my previous games, I wanted to interlace these 2 games. I wanted there to be a theme. I wanted there to be like something to connect both of them. And alright, so here's the thing. Alex was talking about like the mistake of running 5 games at QCon. It's nowhere near as bad as that for me, but I go to QCon to play games, so I was in other people's games for every single session other than my own actual games, and there's only like a small time window before my game would start, and it was like incredibly anxious to, you know, get everything ready for your own game while you're in the middle of someone else's. And that's something that I may want to work on, like, if there is going to be a next QCon. Hopefully there should be, and hopefully I'll be there. I'll probably give myself more breathing space, but I like being in other people's games. I like trying new stuff. I got to play in Exalted and Hunter the Vigil, which was like Hunter the Vigil Father Ted, which is a really funny game. Anyway, so what I decided for the theme in which would link the first game to the second is that I wanted the theme to be revenge.
Woo!
So I was really, really excited about this concept. I was like, okay, so the Party A in the first game are going to play this like any normal Dungeons and Dragons game. I will like have a couple of weird stuff in there to make it fun for them, and a couple of random wild magic effects, and I think they'll really dig it, and like stuff that I will explain that their characters have never ever seen before. And when they get to the final villain, I then wanted the next game to follow in the footsteps of the first game by the villain's friends find out what they did to the villain of the first game, and now are out for fucking blood. Now, one of the things that I was really, really worried about, and what I wanted to avoid above all else, was the second group being evil. I didn't want them to be like, okay, we're the bad guys, and we're this group of minions, and we're gonna avenge the master and like kill these heroes. I was like, no, I don't want to do anything like that. I wanted the second party to think that the first group were the villains, and to feel entirely justified in retribution. And so I'll go through, like, I guess the playlist of the first game. So in the first game, I had a kobold monk called Attila, who was played by Raquel. And Attila was great, actually. Like, Attila did all of the stuff that a good punchy monk would do. And Attila had this habit that I, like, paid attention to and replicated in the second game, of asking people what their associated faith was. They kept, like, asking, like, what god do you believe in, and, like, what's your personal philosophy and stuff like that. And I was like, I don't know why Attila did that, I just noticed that they did it a lot. Then there was, I love this name, by the way, Gustam, the Birdfolk Paladin.
Nice.
Gustam is such a good name for a birdfolk. That was played by Nessa. And Gustam was very, I think, monetarily motivated, because one of the first things that Gustam established when they appeared in the first game was how much they were going to get paid, especially from, like, this small village that probably didn't have a lot to begin with. But I accounted for that possibility. Then there was Zoltal, the changeling cleric played by Daniel. I loved Zoltal. Like, I absolutely loved Zoltal's energy. It was fantastic. Zoltal was very talkative, an incredibly nervous individual who was a bit of a prankster and had gotten himself in a lot of trouble in the past, and who the party gave a little bit of a harsh time to, because what the thing was that in the village that the party were going to help out in, it was a changeling village. Everyone here was a changeling, and we established, I can't even remember how this came about, but, like, Zoltal's player character was like, I'm probably from this village. So I was like, great, you can be the point of contact then for the rest of the party. You can meet them. And then what happened, which like really, really struck me, was that they wanted to roleplay like them finding out the information before they met the party. So we improv'd about 10 minutes of information exchange between Zoltal and the Elder Shaman Meza, of like finding out what had originally happened, like what the trouble was. And then Zoltal like walks out of the shaman's hut and then finds this group of people standing there, like looking a bit, oh, what's going on here? And then Zoltal runs over to them and like, oh great, are you adventurers by any chance? Because we got a serious problem. And I was dead worried when that started happening that the other players wouldn't be into this like one-on-one between the DM and one player character just out of the blue, but like no, they were really into it. And that was good. And
it's always good when that happens, when you think, oh, this is going to be too high concept for this group of people who barely know me, but they really get into it. I remember being surprised that way at the for the mountain game at the first group. Really getting into, I think I mentioned this on the podcast, really getting into the concept of building the dungeon and going so far as to have opinions in character, like characteristic opinions about what should and shouldn't go in.
Yeah, and like with the first 10 minutes of the game, we pretty much established what sort of a person Zoltal not only was, but who they were in the village. And they were the village prankster. And the Elder Shaman Meza did not trust them as far as they could kick them. And it was like quite a funny interaction between this like really annoyed older cleric who was like, Zoltal, we've been over this before. I'm not letting you into like the back of the hut. You'll only like tell everyone. So just leave. Unless you can find someone who's actually capable of dealing with this. Just get out of the hut. And lo and behold, Zoltal finds people. And then we have Davrov, the halfling bard, who was played by Mark. Davrov kind of stuck with Gustam a lot, and they were kind of like a double team. There was Orlir, the Twilight Elf sorcerer, and a Twilight Elf for like people listening, or they're reskinned drow. That they are like, they have the aesthetic of dark elves, but I don't like the Underdark stuff either. So I like made Twilight elves, so I didn't have to call them dark elves, to be a very sun worshipping race of people. And they have like an especially strong connection with the divine Ilmakaios, who is the divine of radiance and providence and justice. And this actually carries over in Okeen, where like the Aztec parts of the continent are. It's mainly Twilight elves who live there, and they have a very Aztecian sort of culture where they revere light. They revere Ilmakaios, who is like the aspect of the sun. And they were a wild magic sorcerer, and they were played by Phelim. And Phelim actually tripped me up by coming to the table with like a custom-made character, who I had to then very kindly say, I'm really sorry, but you can't run your custom-made character in this setting.
I was terrified of that as well.
Yeah, it happened on both of my games, actually.
Oh no!
Yeah.
No, I didn't have anybody do that. I'm kind of wondering now if I like implied in the game description that would not be allowed, which I think is a way of doing it.
I mean, yeah, like I kind of feel like people are like, well, yeah, that's I can't just.
Well, I don't know, because they use the. You don't get final say of what goes in the game description. No. Like managing committee do, and they removed my like separate description for the final game, so I had to like try and do my best with what I had. So it's not perfect, but I think maybe that's like a thing to do. It's like if you can't allow that sort of stuff, do that.
Oh, one thing I thought was really cool about Orlia was that, so there are two types of Twilight Elves. They're the ones who live on Okeen, and they're the ones who live on Athroya. And if they're an Okeen Twilight Elf, they're probably very Aztec in their culture. But if they live on Athroya, then they're Baltic. They have, like, much colder climes, and are generally, like, a hardier sort of people. And Phelim wanted Orlia to be from Athroya, which is fine, which is great. But I love the fact that the wild magic sorcerer, the way that he played it was that they did a lot of ice magic, and I was super into that. It was like really, really flavorful for the character. So they were like casting a lot of Ray of Frost and stuff. Then there was the last person is Sori, a Dermalith rogue played by Lewis. Alex, you've played a Dermalith before. Would you like to explain them?
They're essentially like humans or humanoid beings, but it's exactly what it fucking sounds like. They have like stones growing out of their skin in various places, generally like crystals, like gemstones.
Mm-hmm.
The one I ended up playing was a Druid of Dreams who characteristically was a lot like Luna Lovegood, I think was the inspiration for that. So I just took every druid spell that allowed me to communicate with animals or give other player characters weird presents. But no, they're a group, a race of dermalith people, like skin rock people.
Yeah, I love them aesthetically.
Mm-hmm.
And so they all come together. They're explaining the situation by Zoltal, and the situation is that this village of changelings in Darket is built under the shadow of a mountain called the Miho Mountain, and it's kind of like a sacred mountain to the people, especially amongst the clerics who are called shamans for the purposes of the setting, and they often will go to this like midway into the mountain. There's a carved sort of cave, which is perfect for meditation and ritual. And recently, something weird has been going on with the mountain, and seismic activity is beginning to start up again, which, like, as I've already explained, why that is a terrible thing, even more so than, like, normal seismic activity. It could... a lot of people are frightened of a resurgence of the thematic surges, and these seismic activities are getting more and more intense. And the changeling people of this village thought that the answer would lie in the Miho Mountain, and some clerics, some shamans went up to meditate and to try and ritualistically appease the mountain spirit. And only one of them came back. And that one is called Nakali, who came back wrong. Who came back... I described it when it began that they stumbled into the village, obscuring their face. The first people who came up to them started screaming. And some people who recognized Nakali threw a blanket over his head and ushered him away into Elder Shaman Meza's hut, where he's been ever since. And the party decide to have a look at Nakali, and they find out exactly what's wrong with him. That, as a changeling, as someone who has the ability to take the likeness of other people and other things, Nakali's features are partially transformed by out of fear, and they took on the features of the last thing that was attacking them and that they had to run away from. And so half of Nakali's face is long, weirdly bluish pale. One of the eyes is completely black and sclerical. One of the ears is incredibly long and pointed like an elf, and the teeth on one side of their mouth are now shark-like sharp. And Meza believed that once Nakali had calmed down enough, that the transformation, they would be able to transform back into their original self. So it was just like brought on by fear, basically, and now they were stuck like that because they were still really terrified and traumatized by what had happened. And Nakali had said, like, they saw this creature that looked like an elf, but like no elf that they'd ever seen before in their lives. And that when they went into the cave, it wasn't like a cave anymore. It was like stepping into darkness, and there was weird metal everywhere, and they could see the stars above their head, and they were like just trying to explain as much as they could, were like not really understanding much of what they'd seen. So like when the group were trying to do history rolls and stuff, this made me feel a little bit bad by being like, yeah, even if they got like high rolls, saying to them, you really don't understand this at all. But because like there would be no reason that they would understand it. And so under the offer of a reward, the group decide to look into it. And so they're given supplies, they're given whatever they want from the village, and they head up into the mountain. And the first thing that they notice as they're like going towards the caves is that they keep encountering all these weird anomalies. They keep seeing these silvery rifts everywhere that keep getting larger and more randomly scattered about and more numerous as they head up towards the mountain. So then they start having to make checks not to fall into one. At some point they do try and test them with a stick, and they find that the stick actually pokes out of like a different rift. And they also encounter like creatures which look a cross between a normal creature, but it's been like gelatinous cubed. So they fight off these two monitor lizards which look like jelly lizards with their bones still inside. And like that was like that was a pretty decent fight actually. I felt really bad for the rogue. But also the Dermalith's ability for like negating acid damage really helped there, because they got swarmed by these things and were thankfully taking half damage a lot as these like gelatinous monitor lizards was trying to dissolve them. So they continue like heading up the mountain, and they find the cave, they go in, and they find themselves in this completely darkened space with the exit behind them. And the floor is like made out of this weird rippling mercury that like sends out ripples everywhere that they realize that they have to be quite careful on, because it's like a sensitive vibration trigger, and it causes like several monsters to appear. And what I really loved doing here was that, okay, Alex would be familiar with this, and maybe some people who are listening, but you know the Unstable set from Magic the Gathering?
Yes, it was my favourite Magic release from 2017.
So I liked all of the combining creatures together of that.
It was done very well.
So I replicated that here.
Ah.
They started fighting creatures that were a mismatch of like two or more different monsters. And one of them was like two spirits who had been sewn together. Well, not like Frankenstein sewn together, they just like warped together. And one was like this good spirit, and one was this bad spirit. And I think they were called a Torn. And they had a conversation with this thing, and the good spirit had like this really serene voice, and was telling the party very kindly to leave because they might get hurt here. And the dark spirit was like, get the fuck out or I'll kill you. And they were started arguing with each other, and the party then like manipulated this, and at some point they had to fight it, and they ended up killing the dark half, and it made the good half kind of lonely and sad, because like they were of the opinion that well, they really weren't that bad once you got to know them. I know they shouted at me a lot, but they just had like a lot of problems going on. And the dark half had actually, This is what I mean when I said earlier that Zotal got a lot happen to him. Zotal actually got cursed by the Dark Half to be convinced that other people were holding them back in life, which then like added another roleplay element to the character as they like started changing their interactions with the group, and that was quite funny. As then they started like not being as nervous as before and just be like, come on, let's go, you're holding me back. Let's go to the adventure. Anyway, it all comes down to this this ultimate fight where they find out in this weird subspace that they're in that they don't have to walk anywhere. They can actually project themselves forward. And they're able to like think their way up onto this this area where they see the entity who was responsible for the trauma that happened to Nakali, and like what Nakali had partially transformed into. And it was an elf an elf type that they had never seen before in their entire lives. It was a very unusually tall 7 foot to 8 foot elf of pale skin with like weird glowing pastel blue hair, completely black eyes, and like sharp teeth and long fingernails, and who appeared to be bent over. And I had to then like explain out of character because their characters wouldn't understand this, but like this complex machinery with these weird electron rods all over the place generating electricity. And then the elf turns around and sees them and is like, oh, great, more intruders. And I heavily based the this person, whose name is Master Scholar Sariu, on Peridot when you first meet Peridot from Steven Universe. She came across as being like, yo, the primitives are here. And I will like talk to you as though you are simple-minded creatures who don't really understand what's going on here and can't possibly fathom the depths and intrigue of my research. And they have a conversation with Sariu, one that they did not like very much. So Sariu was an elf. That was like definitely a thing. But they weren't an elf from this world. They were an elf from Aetheroon, which is a high-tech setting in the larger universe of Verdant's Cascade. And the thing about Aetheroon is that it's like a sci-fi diesel punk setting of a completely destroyed world in which magic is a scarce resource and mana is very, very difficult to find and is highly sought after. So Sariu comes from this world which is like almost devoid of mana and which is like treated as this really precious life-giving thing, and has come to Cyrith where there is an abundance of mana, like more mana than they have than they know what to do with, that will eventually kill the planet, and has begun studying the mana of Cyrith and is trying to find a way to synthesize it and import it back to her own world. And this would like open up a whole new energy source for her people, because like she's a scientist and she wants to help the people of where she comes from. She wants to like provide them with this thing that they desperately need, and she figures like this mana is going to destroy this world, so like if we harvest it, we're actually like extending the life expectancy of this whole other world. Sariu did not explain it like that. Sariu was very much of the I really had to sell Sariu as being quite arrogant to and feeling above these primitive people, of being like very matter of fact of like, yes, I'm harvesting the mana of this world, I'm going to use it, and it's like I'm having a few troubles with anomalies, but I'll eventually be able to overcome that, so why don't you be on your way and get out of my lab? And the party took that as like this person is destabilizing our world and is putting us under threat and is stealing the magic of our world, and we should stop them. So this pitched fight happened. Saryu had lair actions, which was cool, because Saryu activated some of the electron rods, which were like channeling the mana from the core, and was part of her experimentation. So then was like activating them to strike lightning at the party, which was triggering wild magic effects, which I didn't use from the wild magic table from the player's handbook. I used them from the Net Librum of Random Magical Effects version 2 by Oryx. It's got some really good stuff, and it's like it's a D1000 sort of table, but I only used the first 100. And
D1000, like, what do you even roll for that?
I have no idea.
Do you like maybe roll like 2 tens dice and then like 1? Would that work?
I think you just have to do it over Discord or something.
I feel like,
or like just a random.
I want to say people who are better at mental maths than me obviously don't react. Don't interact. That's the meme.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure that you can continue, as long as you have like ways of discerning which one is which. You can continue adding tens dice to the end of D100 construction to like multiply it by 10. I think you can. I can't see, because it has a 0 and it has a 1. There's not really any reason why that shouldn't work, I don't think.
Yeah. I've got to say, though, while it's on the cards, I love option number 18, which is, like, the funniest shit to me and would probably make her character completely unplayable. And it's number 18, a distant but powerful army declares war on you. And I was like, how would you even deal with... A whole army declares war on you. Just you.
I mean, I feel like that probably wouldn't necessarily have to have any impact in the session itself.
Yeah, but like, luckily
just because they declare
it.
war on you doesn't mean they're necessarily going to do anything about it within the time scale that you're actually concerned with. But that would be quite scary.
That would be like really, really funny for a long-term campaign of like you're randomly in a town and like a small scouting party is like, there they are!
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's true.
It would be hilarious. Anyway, so I think 4 party members got hit by the lightning. And it was Attila whose like arms became invisible, which for a monk was fantastic. Because then she just got advantage on like her punches.
Right, because they can't see where she's punching.
Orleo had like all these oils, sweet smelling oils, like oozing out of his pores. Sori appeared to everyone as like a decomposing corpse. Of course Zotal gets hit. And I'll save that till the end, because like when I rolled for Zotals, it was the funny. No, when they rolled for Zotals, it was the funniest thing ever. It was like absolutely perfect for the character. And they get into this fight with Saryu, and it's a good hard fight. And she does like a changed up version of Thunder Wave, which was like done at a higher spell level, and instead of doing thunder damage, I did like force damage. And but they eventually like they take her down, and how they take her down is actually quite important because they use Shatter on the electron rods. And I explained to them that the electron rods themselves aren't magical; they're conduits of magic. They have, like, magic running within them, but they themselves aren't. They're just normal, like, steel, sharp pipes. So, Shatter was cast on them, and they all just skewer Master Scholar Saryu. And then, like, so, like, she dies, like, skewered by her own technology. And the party then leave, and they go back to the village to collect the reward. And that's where Zotal finds out what the weird magical effect was when they get back. So they go back to their personal hut, and they find that the vegetation within 100 feet of their hut is completely gone. And, like, Zoltal just, like, falls to his knees and is like, my cabbages! And so, like, his entire fruit and veg garden is just fucked. And it was so funny, like, everyone was laughing at the misfortunes of this poor cleric. Because, like, now he's got no food, and now he has to, like, hope that the other villagers will be charitable to him, which is probably what ultimately motivates him to being included in the second game, because now he has to travel around. That was, like, one of the things I was also concerned with. When it was established that Zoltal was a member of the village, what then would be the reason that Zoltal would carry on traveling with this party of people? Because he had to travel with them. It was important to the next session, to the revenge plot. And I feel as though, like, Zoltal's livelihood destroyed in the form of all of the vegetables being gone, decided, like, well, I've got to travel and make money now with these people. And that leads into the next session. So, for the next session, I started off with 6 new player characters who I tell this story of how they were all handpicked by a woman called Master Scholar Sariu from their own world. Their relationship with this woman that I, like, put on all of their character sheets was that they were in some way very fond of, or, like, apprenticed to. They had to have a positive relationship with Sariu. That was what was really important. To the point where she actually picked each of them to join her in her efforts to, like, be part of her team, and that she was going to set up and get everything ready, and they were gonna, like, come over and help, and they would make this groundbreaking research that could potentially save countless lives in their own world. And lo and behold, they get to where she's been conducting her research, and they find her skewered body, and they then have to, like, they then decide, like, we can't let this stand, so we're gonna find the assholes who did this to our friend, and we're gonna make them pay. And the players were really, really into that, because, like, as soon as they picked up on what was going on, they were like, do we get to design the dungeon for another group of people? And I'm like, you absolutely do. And they were so enthusiastic about it, and I was really, really happy. So, story-wise, I explained to them that they found those responsible for it, that they've experienced no repercussions for their actions. In fact, they were praised for it. And that they've been getting stronger and stronger, and traveling around. And this second group, the Sariu Avengers, have been watching them from afar for quite some time, and have determined that these guys are out of our league. We cannot take them in a fair fight. So they follow them all the way to the Minoi region, and they scrounge. I give them a starting block of money of 1,000 gold pieces between the 6 of them that they can all pool together or spend individually, to be like, you all come from the same world. You all come from Etherune, and to blend in with the people of Cyrith, you've taken on new forms. You've taken on, like, masks with the abilities attached to the races that you've decided to become in order to blend in. And I didn't want to reveal to them what they actually were. I just told them that, like, you're from a different world. Like, what you are right now is not what you actually are. It's just a disguise. And you've acquired all this money, and you can use it however you want to make sure that these people pay for what they've done in however you like. And I'll run through the list. There was Adrian, the Orian cleric, who was played by Ryan. And Ryan immediately wanted to know what sort of cleric he was, and I, like, had to whisper in his ear he was a cleric of the void, which isn't actually a bad thing if you come from Etherune. And Orians are, like, humans who became plant people. Then there was Alexis, the sea elf druid, played by Chris, who was, like, a land druid with the coastal one, which made the most sense for a sea elf. There was Piotr, the Sangramore warlock, played by Daniel. Piotr, we established, was where all the Sangramore are from. The Sangramore are like vampire humans. They're from Afroya. And most of them are like very ancient Chinese in like the midsection of the continent. But those in the north have a very like Laplander Sami sort of culture. So they like he chose like a Finnish name for his character. He was also the other player who had bought a pre-gen character sheet.
Oh no!
Yeah, he was the other one. There was Olpa, the half-dwarf ranger, played by Sergey. There was, I love this name by the way, Lurk Scalebane, the lizard folk fighter, played by Kieran. The only person who gave their character a second name. It's amazing. And finally, there was Sungweir, the Air Genasi rogue, played by Farum. And it was like really, really cool how this party got into it. They were like, they put their heads together, they were really scheming about this. They were asking all the right questions, because what was important and what I had to do as a DM was that I had to give them monsters that they could use, and I had to give them a staging ground for where they ultimately wanted to make the first group go to, if that was a course of action that they wanted to take. I told them that the plan was entirely in their hands, and I gave them 3 options, so I had to like prepare 3 separate locations that could potentially be the staging grounds. So one was like a former Twilight Elf fortress that had now fallen into ruins. Another was like this like cavernous complex that led to a grove. And another one was called Yolma, which, if you've ever played the Shivering Isles DLC from Elder Scrolls Oblivion, it was like Zedillion, the weird fortress that Sheogorath has you put back into order, which like lures adventurers into to either kill them or drive them mad. And like that was the whole point of this this temple called Yolma. It was built by a demigod called Razgon, who liked to hurt people a lot, and especially liked it if it like caused them a great deal of emotional and mental duress while they were undergoing like the trials and horrors and traps of this place. And the party learn about these 3 locations, and they choose the Twilight Elf Fortress. They choose the ruins. They get there, and they decide to, a very smart move, scout it out. They look inside, and thankfully they creeped inside. That was really good, because I established to them, this is ruins, so there's going to be like a lot of structural damage, so you might want to be careful. And they did really, really well on like their movement checks and stuff like that. And they eventually came into this large chamber which had a sleeping Dark Souls boss in it, which was based on Great Grey Wolf Sith and Vort of the Burrell Valley. It was like a combination between the 2 of them, but it was like all gold and like had all these cool feathers and stuff.
Objection.
And what?
Sif is a good girl, and Vort is an abomination. How dare you combine them?
I mean, it's my setting.
Sure.
It's legal, it's the law. I have to inform you, Maxi can do whatever she wants. It says right here, on this badge I gave her, just says Maxi can do whatever she wants. And it's lawfully binding.
Okay.
So, they go into this temple and they edge around the Dark Souls boss. And they find a viewing platform, which they are super into. They're like, they find it behind like a secret wall. We're like, oh, not a secret wall, like nothing had to move so that, to cause a noise. Rather, it was like a very small doorway, which had like a minor illusion to make it look like a wall. So they found it, they go up to this viewing platform, and they're like, great, we can watch them die from up here. They were so enthusiastic about this. It was quite funny. And then they had to determine what monsters they wanted to pitch against the first party. And I gave them like a bunch of monsters to choose from, like a complete diverse range, and I expected them to scout out these places. The reason I gave them so many and made them like so far apart was that I was like, you guys can't go and check out all of them and be able to like lead the group through all of them because you don't actually have enough time, because I actually gave them a time limit when the warlock and the cleric both received like a mental message from their own world. The cleric through the connection to the void, and Piotr through his patron. And it was like, you've spent enough time in this world and we're aware of Saryu's death. It's time to come home. And they were like, fuck. The parents want us back. And so we have to do this now. We've got to do this revenge plot now. And we can't scout out all of these monsters and lead the party through all of them. We'd have to like pick and choose them. So they decided not to scout out any of them. They were like, we're gonna do it live. We're gonna drag the party from the first group through each of these encounters and just see how it goes. Other means of like how they tried to trip up the party beforehand was that they bought a health potion and they asked around this village what kind of poisonous and horrific things are in the jungle. And they spiked this health potion with a paralyzing agent from a purple bellflower, so that they would like offer it to an injured party member from the first group and be like, oh here, this will help you immensely, and fingers crossed that person will fall down to the ground and be unable to move. They also tried like they tried like this yellow creeper, which was like ripped straight from the Tube of Annihilation, because I really, really liked this horrible parasitic vine-like flower that once it got its hooks into an actual sapient being would like dig its roots in and like take over their brainwaves and stuff and turn them into a zombie. It was like, it's pretty gnarly. And they like harvested a bunch of seeds of that, and we're gonna like the Orion Adrian the Orion cleric was going to plant growth them to consume to attack the first group, and it was like they like buried them and stuff, and they like set up traps, and it was like very, very cleverly done. Well, the important thing was to get the first party through all of the stuff that they'd set up, and eventually to the ruins where they could fight this Dark Souls boss, and where they could be watched to be killed. And they decided to split the party, which actually worked out really, really well for them. So 2 of them, which was I think it was Sungweir, the rogue, and Ulpa, the ranger, they stayed at the ruins to wait for everyone else. Lurk and Adrian, they were gonna be the sabotage committee, where they were gonna run ahead of each of the monster encounters and like hide in trees and stuff and intervene wherever necessary. And just, like, watch from afar of how things were going. And that worked incredibly well. It had one of the best moments I have ever seen in perhaps, like, any of the games that I've ever run. And then we had Piotr and Alexis, who decided that, like, what their play was going to be was that they were going to be these scholars who would approach the first party and be like, we're working on a potion of true resurrection. it's going to be like revolutionary, and we need the ingredients from all of these various places, and we are like but scholars. We're not fighters. We don't know how to hold our own against the horrible monsters that live there. But you seem like a strong, strapping lot. Could you guide us and fight these horrible encounters and help us collect the things that we need? And we would be more than happy to share the secrets of this true resurrection potion with you. You would have the power of unlimited life in your hands. And if you don't believe us, like, look, and they like showed them the bag full of seeds from the creeper vine. I was like this is our starting ingredient. Like, they had like advantage on the persuasion roll because Alexis was assisting Piotr, who was like doing the majority of the talking and was like sort of chiming in and keeping the level of bullshit going. And I was rolling for insight from the group, and only at one point did one person within the first party get suspicious, and that was Attila, the monk, which they were able to like dodge past eventually. But they managed to get the party involved with like the promise of being paid in gold and like this access to a true resurrection potion. It was going to be great. And so they started like going through all of these encounters with monsters. And what I did for this particular thing was that I had to pay attention when the first group were playing of what their play style was, obviously. Like, who favored what sort of spells, and like needing to replicate that for this game. Who got healed the most, who was the first to be healed, things like that. And I kind of like improvised the mass combat rules from the Unearthed Arcana, and like each of them had their own hit point amount, but also like a collective group pool of hit points. And I was keeping track of like healing spells that they would have available, and like their damage output versus the damage output of the creatures they were fighting, because like I wasn't gonna do combat with a group whose players weren't there against all these monsters. That would be ridiculous. I was gonna like roll a couple of times, like some D10, some D100s, and it's so hard to like explain the mechanics of what I did, but it worked out really, really well. I was like trying to like verse who would go first between the first party and the monsters, and like who did the most damage output, and which of the party members from the first group probably took the most damage, and things like that. What I absolutely loved was the sabotage committee, Adrian and Lurk, who were hiding in the trees. Adrian specifically, as the spellcaster, and Piotr, who was like standing back watching the party fight. They both started casting spells secretly on the first group to make them fail. So a couple of times, Zotal's like comes in to heal someone, and their healing was getting counterspelled. Zotal can't even get a fucking break in the second game. So like all of the healing that Zotal was doing kept getting counterspelled, and
that's such a power move.
It was so good. I was really, really impressed. And even when like the health potion stuff with the poison in it failed, they were still coming up with really good ideas spell-wise to fuck over this other group of people. And I think my favorite moment of them ultimately doing this was I mentioned before with Attila the Kobold. I feel really bad for Raquel. I'll never see Raquel again, but I feel really, really bad for what happened to her character. And so they get to this clearing where 4 posts had been set up in a makeshift wrestling arena, and there was this large, hairy, like Tanaruk type creature, which was like more appropriate for the Southeast Asian setting. I gave it a completely different name. I think I called it Asuno. Who was like, so wrestling in that sort of area would be called Malayuda. Yeah, I think I'm saying that right. Malayuda. And, or Malayuda. And they were like in the middle of this makeshift wrestling ring, shouting challenges at people. Because of course I was gonna put wrestling in my game. And they see this party and they like, they issue a challenge. And Piotr, like, butters up Attila to go and like fight the Suno. So as like, you're the monk and you're like you're clearly gonna like take this guy on. Like, if no one else but you. Really.
No one at any point pointed out that the kobold was like 2 feet tall and the Tanaruk was like 8 foot. Like,
and like Piotr especially wanted to get rid of Attila at this point because Attila was already suspicious. This was after the point when Attila had like got a really high insight roll to something that Piotr had said and had called them out on it, but they were able to like brush it under the carpet. But that had made Piotr wary enough of Attila that they were like, we have to get rid of the fucking kobold. The next encounter, they have to die. So Attila gets into the ring with this huge Suno, and they get ready to like start fighting. And then Ryan, who's playing Adrian, who's like hiding in the trees as the sabotage committee, says to me, I cast Hold Person on Attila. And Attila rolls a natural, like I as Attila roll a natural 1. So I want you to imagine for me, in your mind's eye, this tiny little kobold standing there in front of this giant, just enormous creature, ready to do battle, ready to like prove to everyone that they're this like, yeah, I'm gonna beat this professional wrestler. And all of a sudden their limbs seize up and like they're unable to move. And Ryan tells me that the Suno automatically crits on like poor Attila. So Attila gets turned into a pancake.
Yeah, good night Attila. Good night, sweet Attila. We hardly.
And I was like, everyone on the table was howling with laughter. I had to sit down. I was choking so much. I could not believe that happened. It was phenomenal. And so the rest of the party rush in to bring down the Suno together. And so like at this point, Attila has died. I think Zotul was already killed. Aulia gets killed by this spirit of a giant called Wang Lian, who was murdered by Twilight Elves and so specifically hates them. And so then there's 3 people left. There's Gustam, Dorov, and Sorry. And they're finally led to the ruins. And Piotr, Adrian and Lurk run on ahead to get to the ruins, and they like tell Sungwei and Ulpa, hey, we're about ready to go, so we might as well get into the viewing gallery and watch the show. And Alexis and Piotr lead the remainder of the first group to the ruins, like the last 3, and then they book it across the courtyard where they had previously had some veteran big game hunters capture this large cat-like monstrosity to let loose in the courtyard as soon as they were ready. So like they book it across the courtyard as fast as they can, and they like run into the ruins. And so like I think Ulpa dies to the giant cat monster. So then it's just Gustam and Sori left. And I'm still rolling insight for those 2, and they're getting really low insight. So at one point, Gustam Sori yells at Piotr and who was it now? Piotr and Alexis, like, don't go in there. It's like, it might be dangerous. And like the group are like, they still haven't figured out that we're trying to fuck them over. It was absolutely hilarious to them. And eventually, when they actually get into the Dark Souls boss fight, they realize that they finally cotton on to what's going on. And it was a really, really great moment where, like, Sori looks up at the platform where they're all standing from, and, like, looks at the Dark Souls boss, and then clicks in and goes, wait a minute, you're setting us up. And I think Piotr was the one who just went, no shit, we're setting you up! In, like, a really legit angry voice. At, like, he was like, I really liked Piotr's character, and how much it came across, throughout the game, how invested they were in their friendship with Saryu. Because at one point, I think the Paladin comments that they Gustam comments that they met Zotal like a couple of months ago, during like this really wild job that they sorted out, and they were laughing about it. And then Piotr's like player character's eye starts twitching, and he's like, and he then like responds through gritted teeth. Oh, how lovely! It's really nice to meet people under strange circumstances, like really, really angry. And they like, in the final fight, they all roll initiative, and they become involved in basically taking pot shots from the gallery at the, at Gustam and Sori. And, when they're downed, they presumably, like, take out the Dark Souls boss themselves, or they like find a way out of there, because we ran out of time at that point, so I was like wrapping up. But eventually how I ended the session was that the end of the day comes about, your time is up, and you all stand in a circle. The warlock and the cleric like join hands in front of each other across the circle, and a ball of shadow and light begins to appear between them that starts to like spiral outwards into all these like shadowy tendrils that touch each person individually, and with a single touch it glows a brief sky blue, and they're engulfed by this sphere of blue and light and darkness. And as it's happening, their facial features, the borrowed forms that they were wearing, melt away, and they look across at one another with triumphant smirks in your true form as you reappear in a landscape of red with stars and Aurelia Boris above you, and you know that you're home, and you know that you've done well. And that was like how I ended the session, and it was a really cool 2 sessions I found.
Yeah, you know, that's cool. I like the I like the setup principle. It just occurred to me that I think before we go, because we are like very late. I made a note here that I should have mentioned the thing that I alluded to previously about character abilities. So I mentioned, I think in the previous QCon House of Bards, that QCon is where I get a lot of use out of the Gale Force 9 spell cards, which usually are not particularly useful, I find. But as soon as you get a bunch of people who may or may not know how to play the game around a table, and some of them are going to end up playing spellcasters, that's great. And I thought, well, why don't I take that one step further? I have a bunch of what do we call these? So, for those of you who play Magic the Gathering or Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Pokemon or any like trading card game, you'll probably know what a binder is, which is a plastic booklet full of sheets. Generally sheets of 9, although you can get smaller booklets of sheets of 4. Pockets, like little plastic pockets, into which cards can be slotted, and you generally use that as a portfolio of tradable rare cards for for sale. You can actually get those kinds of like pocketed binder sheets loose, like as individual separate things to go into a like standard 3-ring binder. And having had those, I thought, oh, if I were to like have these, I could print out little cards that had like the abilities that a class had. And then that would be great for my game because I could start them out with only a few abilities, and then as the players like got more and more abilities, I could just add those into the pocket binder, and I could just like give one of those out alongside the sheet, and then I'm not trying to fit the entirety of the character class into the features and traits section of the sheet, which is not actually what that is for, because I can't use the back of the sheet because some of them have spellcasting sheets, which is what goes on the back. So that's like the one thing that did work very well. I would probably do it again, to be honest, because it was just like easy, and it laid the information out in a way that helps the players understand with only one actual like additional reference object. So yeah, that was good. And if you're running if you're running games like in a convention setting or for people to jump in, I recommend something of that sort, just so they're not constantly. I mean, I mentioned before like printing out the photocopies, if you like, of the relevant PHP pages as a solution for that before, and that's all right, but it does mean they have to scramble for some of that information. Whereas I could like make these separate things. Although obviously, in cases where a character got a lot of very small abilities, sometimes they had to go on the same card, so it's a bit swings and roundabouts, I suppose. That was all I wanted to mention, just because I said I was going to mention it earlier. So if I didn't, people would be mad unless I cut all the references to that out. But yeah, that was all I wanted to say. I just remembered that I hadn't spoken about that. I think that's us then.
Yeah. It's been great listening to the two of you. You know.
Yes.
Sure.
It's great that we could tell you about that. I don't know necessarily that the dream of getting Beth to QCon is ever going to happen, but I look forward to the notion perhaps of the three of us eventually like meeting up and doing a thing together at some point in the distant future. That could be a thing. We could talk about that. We have been Alex,
Beth,
and my co-host is dead, apparently. And our guest has been
me, Maxi.
I said my name. I said.
No, you didn't.
Yeah, I did.
No, we didn't hear you.
Whatever.
That's most unfortunate. Maybe that was Discord's fault.
Hey, look.
Point is,
the people know who I am. Okay.
It's true. If you haven't figured it, like, I hope you're not starting with this episode, because this would be a terrible episode to start with. At the very least, if you're going to start with a QCon episode, start with the first one, episode 3.
Yeah.
We got the audio quality to a listenable condition at that point.
Yeah,
it's great. Go back and listen to it.
Also,
anyway,
it's really funny as well. I break down in laughter for like a full 5 minutes. Alex broke me. So.
Don't say that. Don't say that to the innocent radio people at home. No. Wow.
Alex gave me the giggles in a completely innocent
The
way.
music was by Kevin MacLeod, and we will see you all next time. Bye-bye.
Whenever that may be.
Bye.
Yes,
Bye.
whenever that may be. Bye-bye.